Wasn't enough for the amount of times I'm getting into newer shows. My binge watching schedule, if I ever had one, is going to take much more longer to get to these shows in the future. All I can say is that I was fully aware of Big City Greens being one of Disney Channel's cartoons in the modern times, and with this being the longest cartoon as of now, in comparison of Amphibia, The Owl House, and The Ghost and Molly McGee, I'm going to assume that the effort put into this show was a lot more different compared to the effort put into the other shows. Mainly the fact that this show isn't supposed to be taking itself seriously compared to the shows that I've mentioned. And for me personally, Green Christmas really sums up everything of what this show is, and whenever I think about Cricket and Tilly in this episode in particular, all I can think of is these are mostly the same characters from Amphibia and the other shows beforehand, which isn't saying a lot knowing full well that Disney Channel cartoons are a lot more different compared to Nickelodeon and Cartoon Network's shows, and I've stated that multiple times. The focus of this episode centers around Tilly trying to help Cricket do a good deed, because after watching a mini flashback of what Cricket did over the series, I can instantly tell what type of character he is, to the point that he's basically like Sprig, except that this show came out before Amphibia, and for me personally, it really feels a lot more weirder to think that Cricket is the type of character that does naughty deeds while his sibling does the opposite. Speaking of weird or ironic, the mother and grandmother didn't have gifts for Bill, who is the father of the family, while he gave them gifts. For me personally, the fact that the women are actually in this scenario instead of the genders being reversed really shows that this episode just gave me an episode that just got me invested with this show, and yet at the same time, it just made me even more impressed that they actually did this switcheroo with the characters. If I'm gonna be perfectly honest with you, the fact that we're witnessing a Jingle All the Way plot involving the parents, well, the women are in this scenario instead of the men, just goes to show that this show isn't scared to taking risks, because it isn't like Amphibia or The Owl House, and knowing full well that this show is still going on with a fourth season along the way, along with a movie, and by looking at bits and pieces of later projects of the show while the characters are moving out of the city, I'm going to assume that it wasn't Cricket's bad deeds, but for how he is portrayed in this episode. And speaking of Cricket and Tilly, who are the siblings in this, the fact that Tilly is willing to help out Cricket by doing the good deed during the Christmas season shows that she has a heart by doing something completely different by helping out his siblings. And believe me, I know full well that after all the Christmas episodes and materials that I've seen, even if there were exception of few, I don't think I ever saw an episode that tackles a plot of a sibling character helping out another sibling character during the Christmas season by doing a good deed. And at this point, I pretty much give up on how the main characters are supposed to be likable and not being portrayed as Cricket is in this episode, because the fact that Cricket is mostly known on doing bad deeds throughout this show after seeing the flashback, and what he does in this goes to show that he can't be able to control himself, not to mention that he accidentally got his sister into the naughty list after the many times that he spent her life to be on the nice list. Then this episode alone just sums up what this show is totally about for me, because the fact that Cricket was trying to moon himself, mainly showing his butt in front of everyone on Christmas, all the while Tilly is trying to stop him from doing so, goes to show that she is the type of person that stays on the Parliament naughty list, while Cricket, on the other hand, is honestly out of his mind whenever he completely gets into these situations. And I really felt bad for Tilly for being on the naughty list over something that she didn't mean to cause. And considering that the adults are having a difficult time giving the father a gift during Christmas, then it just gave me the impression that the Green family just isn't fully functional. I mean, but just by watching this episode, it really feels like that the parents are somewhat functional, but when it comes to the kids, they're always going to be dysfunctional regardless. And the way that this episode is executed for how Cricket is being portrayed as the naughty person while Tilly is the nice person, all the while that you have the adults just trying to find or make a gift for the father. All I can think of is, this episode is just like every other episode from this show, even if I didn't see them yet. So, this is basically the same formula from We Bare Bears when I watched Christmas Parties 3 years ago. Like, you can make the argument that both shows are still different regardless when it comes to its characters and personalities, but the way that this episode is executing its characters by having one of them being a naughty person while the adults are just trying to find a gift for that relative goes to show that this episode just basically has it all for a show called Big City Greens. Like, even if it's only this episode, and it's gonna take time for me to watch more episodes from the beginning, the impression I got from this episode is that the Green family is just like every other family I've witnessed. I mean, it's not as dysfunctional as the Lau family, but the way I see it, it really feels like that the meaning of Christmas into this is just all about kindness. And considering that the subplot did center around kindness while the focus is mostly on Cricket most of the time, it gave me the impression that this is honestly a first for him. I mean, in previous years, he probably got gifts of his own, and the fact that he's mostly concerned that something bad is going to happen was probably going to be a long time coming, regardless of what happens in his life. And for me personally, the scene, well, he sees Santa, but mostly a figment of his imagination, or if this is the real Santa, judging of how the ending is portrayed, then I really felt like that this is a lesson that he would have learned way later than right now if he didn't ruin Tilly's good list goal. Like, the fact that his goal is mostly opening presents in Christmas morning is somewhat appropriate for a child's age, even if some childs like Tilly are born differently. And at the same time, I really felt like that what Cricket learned in this episode is just to be respectful towards his siblings while also being on the nice list for real. If you ask me, all the bad deeds that he did in this episode alone just shows that he can't think clearly, and for how he's portrayed, I'm pretty sure that he hasn't changed for the better, but he would still do good deeds along the way, even if I'm incorrect. I guess one of the final elements to talk about are the songs. There are more than 3 songs with a reprise version at the end. If I'm gonna be honest with you, if this is a standard of what Big City Greens episodes are like, then I'm going to be expecting a lot more if I'm ever going to binge watch this show. In my opinion, the songs are entertaining and good, but I do not have a favorite. I don't know if it's the genres that I'm not into, regardless if these characters are country folk, but for how that these songs are mostly placed into the season of the holidays, and if there is a chance that they sing more songs in multiple episodes before and after, it would definitely take a lot of time for me to get into these songs, because believe me when I say this, I didn't get into any of the songs in the cartoons that I've been watching recently. Unlike Across the Goals or My Little Pony, regards of those songs just didn't help out, just didn't work out for me as time went on. I'm going to assume that the songs themselves are probably what people remember the most from the show, even though it couldn't be the case. Because I'm going to assume that the popular things from this show are probably for different things that I haven't witnessed yet. Look, when I think about cartoon songs and cartoons, I enjoy most of them in fact, especially when it comes to live action. But nowadays, it just doesn't feel the same considering that I just can't be able to get into songs involving cartoons like I used to. And my perspective on the cartoons that I enjoy the music from just isn't the same, and it just died down for how it just didn't work out for me like it was. And believe me when I say this, is that if it is true that this show does musical numbers in most of the episodes before and after, then keep in mind, it's probably not going to be a saving grace from my perspective. With that being said, this episode got me interested into this show, but at the same time not much compared to We Bare Bears. Like I said, things have changed over the last 3 years, and when it comes to my perspective on Big City Greens, it's going to take time for me to watch every single episode from the first season to the present. Granted, there's a chance for me to be fully interested into this show, but at the same time, only time will tell. And granted, I said that so many times in the past, but that's basically what happens whenever I get into these shows when it comes to holiday material. I'm giving this episode a 6.75 out of 10.